The hilt was cold, a bitter promise against his palm. He stared at the two halves of the blade, the jagged break a mocking grin in the firelight. They had called it sulfur, a weapon forged in the heart of a fallen star, said to be unbreakable. And yet it lay in pieces at his feet, a mirror to his own shattered spirit. The man who held the hilt was named Kalen, and he was the last of the Sunstone Guard, a lineage of protectors who had failed their one true purpose. The fire before him was not one of warmth or comfort. It was the Never-Die, an eternal flame that had burned since the dawn of his people, a flame they were sworn to protect. Now, it was the only thing illuminating the encroaching darkness, a darkness that had consumed his brothers, his city, and his hope. The enemy was not a horde of beasts or a conquering army. It was a creeping, silent rot, a despair that turned good men to stone and strong wills to dust. And it had broken the unbreakable sword. He looked from the fractured metal to the undying flame. One was a symbol of his failure, the other, a testament to something that endured beyond strength, beyond steel. A question, colder than the hilt in his hand, echoed in the chamber of his mind. What is a warrior without his weapon? What is a man without his purpose? The fire flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls, and in their movement he saw the faces of the fallen. They did not accuse. They waited. The cold from the hilt seeped into his bones, a familiar poison. He had two choices. Let the darkness take him as it had the others to become another stone monument to failure, or what? The broken sword could not be reforged. The lost could not be returned. He was one man against a tide of absolute nothingness. He tightened his grip on the hilt, the sharp edges of the broken steel digging into his flesh. The pain was a dull, distant thing compared to the abyss that yawned within him. He was broken. The sword was broken, but the fire still burned, and in its heart a secret waited, a truth more powerful than any blade, a truth that could only be found when everything else was lost. This is not a story about a hero. This is a story about the moment a man, stripped of everything he thought defined him, is forced to find what truly makes him unbreakable. And it's a journey that you, in the quiet chambers of your own life, might know all too well. You felt that cold hilt in your hand, haven't you? That feeling of holding a shattered piece of what was supposed to be your strength, a failed business, a broken relationship, a lost dream. You've stood before the flickering flame of your own hope, watching the darkness creep in, whispering that it's over. You've asked yourself, what now? Who am I without this thing I thought was me? We are all, in some way, Kalen. We are all the last guard of a flame we fear is dying. We all carry the pieces of a broken sword. But what if I told you that the breaking of the sword was not the end of the warrior, but the beginning? What if the moment of your greatest failure is the crucible in which your true strength is forged? Not the strength of steel, which can be shattered, but the strength of the fire that never dies. Stay with me, and I will show you how to find that fire within yourself. I will show you how the most profound strength is not found in what you carry in your hand, but in the will that refuses to be extinguished. The journey begins not with reforging the blade, but with understanding why it had to break in the first place. The silence of the great hall was a weight, heavier than any shield. Kalen had sat there for a day, or perhaps a lifetime, the two pieces of soul fire laid before him. The fire, the Never-Die, cast its eternal, unwavering glow, a stark contrast to the tumult in his soul. He had replayed the moment of its breaking 1,000 times. It wasn't a climactic battle, no thunderous clash of titans. It was a subtle, insidious thing. He had faced one of the Hallowed, a former brother-in-arms now consumed by the encroaching despair. The man's eyes were vacant, his movements sluggish, devoid of the grace he once possessed. Kalen had raised sulfur, its inner light a beacon against the gloom. But when his blade met the Hallowed simple, unadorned iron, it was sulfur that had shattered. It broke not with a bang, but with a quiet, crystalline chime that echoed the breaking of his own heart. The Hallowed had not even seemed to notice. He had simply shuffled past, a ghost in his own armor, and disappeared into the shadows. Kalen had been left on his knees, staring at the pieces, the truth a cold serpent coiling in his gut. The sword had not broken because of the enemy's strength. It had broken because of his own weakness. The despair, the silent rot, had already found its way into him. Soulfire was a reflection of its wielder's spirit. His spirit was fractured, and so the blade had followed. This is the first truth you must face. Your breaking point is never about the external force. It's about the internal foundation. The market didn't crush your business, the foundations were already cracked. Her words didn't break your heart, your sense of self was already fragile. The world doesn't break you. It simply reveals where you were already broken. We spend our lives forging our swords, our careers, our reputations, our relationships, our identities. We polish them, sharpen them, and hold them up as proof of our strength. We believe them to be unbreakable, and when they shatter, our first instinct is to blame the force that struck the blow. But the Stoics knew a different truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, then throw it out. There are brambles in the path, then go around them. That's all you need to know." He didn't say to curse the cucumber or rage at the brambles. He understood that the nature of things is what it is. The world will present bitterness. The path will have thorns. Your sword will be tested. The real question is not how to prevent the test, but how to build an inner citadel that the test cannot breach. Kalen believed his strength was in soulfare. It was a legendary weapon, a symbol of his lineage and his duty. It was his identity. When it broke, his identity shattered with it. He was no longer Kalen, the Sunstone Guard. He was Kalen, the failed. Kalen, the last. Kalen, the broken. Have you ever done that? Have you ever fused your sense of self so completely with something outside of you that its loss felt like your own death? Your job title, your role as a husband or wife, your identity as an athlete. These are all swords, and all swords can break. The fire before him crackled, and a voice, not of the ears but of the soul, seemed to whisper on the edge of the flames. It was the voice of his first mentor, a grizzled old warrior named Lyron, who had trained him not just to fight but to see. "The sword is an extension of the arm," Lyron had told him, his voice like the grinding of stones. "The arm is an extension of the will, but the will is the fire itself. You are not the steel, boy, you are the flame." Kalen had not understood then. He was young, arrogant, his skill with the blade unmatched. He thought the fire Lyron spoke of was the fire of battle, the heat of glory. Now, in the cold ashes of his own glory, he began to see. He had been so focused on the sword that he had neglected the fire. He had let his inner flame dwindle, starved it with doubt, smothered it with fear. The despair that had hollowed his brother had found fertile ground in him because he had given it a place to grow. He had relied on the symbol of strength, not the source of it. Your first step on this path is to stop mourning the broken blade. Stop staring at the pieces of your past failures, your lost identities. They are gone. They were steel, and steel can always break. Your task now is to turn your attention to the fire, the one that still flickers, however faintly, within you. It is the fire of your consciousness, your will, your capacity to choose your response. Epictetus, a man who was once a slave, knew this better than anyone. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." He understood that the one thing no one could ever take from him, not his master, not the emperor, was his power to choose his own mind. That is the fire that never dies. Kalen looked at his hands. They were trembling not from fear but from a strange new sensation. It was the feeling of emptiness. The absence of the sword's familiar weight was a liberation. He was untethered from the symbol. He was forced, for the first time, to feel the strength, or lack thereof, in his own arms, his own will. He reached out not for the hilt but for the other piece, the sharp, jagged end. He picked it up, its edge still keen. It was no longer a part of a legendary whole. It was just a piece of sharp metal, a tool, nothing more. And in that realization a profound shift occurred. The despair in him didn't vanish, but its grip loosened. The cold in his bones receded, pushed back by a nascent warmth. He had lost his sword, but he was still here. The fire still burned. and the night was still held at bay. What is the broken sword you are still clinging to? What piece of your past, what shattered identity are you still mourning? See it for what it is, a piece of metal, a tool you once used. Its breaking does not mean you are broken. It means you are now free to find the weapon that can never be shattered, your own indomitable will. The journey is not about finding a new sword, it's about becoming one. The shard of the blade felt alien in his hand. It was a crude thing, unbalanced, its beauty stripped away, leaving only its raw, dangerous potential. Kalen held it, not as a swordsman but as a survivor. The grand, sweeping arcs and elegant parries of his former life were useless now. This was a tool for close, desperate work. The change in the weapon forced a change in him. He could no longer rely on reach or reputation. He had to rely on proximity, on grit, on a willingness to get close to the danger, to feel its breath on his skin. He stood up, his joints cracking in protest. The great hall, once a symbol of his order's strength, now felt like a tomb. The silence was no longer just heavy, it was hungry. He knew the Hollowed were out there in the city's shadowed streets. They were not an army to be fought, but a plague to be understood. Why had they fallen? Why had his brother, a man whose laughter could shake the rafters, become a silent, shuffling shell? The answer was tied to the breaking of his own sword. It was a failure of the will. He ventured out of the hall, the shard of soulfire held tight in his hand. The city was a ghost of itself. Banners, once vibrant with the sigil of the sun, now hung ripped and faded. The despair was a physical presence, a cold mist that clung to the cobblestones. It wasn't just sadness, it was a profound emptiness, a surrender of the soul. He soon found one of them. A woman, a merchant he had known, sat on the steps of her empty shop, her eyes fixed on nothing. She wasn't weeping, she wasn't raging. She was simply absent. Her fire had gone out. This is the second truth you must embrace. You cannot fight the darkness with the old weapons. When your life shatters, your first instinct is to try and piece it back together exactly as it was. You try to rebuild the same business, find the same kind of relationship, chase the same old dream. You are trying to fight a new war with an old map. It will not work. The landscape of your life has changed. You must change with it. The breaking of your sword is a sign that the old way of fighting is no longer effective. The world is demanding a new version of you. The shard in Kalen's hand was a symbol of this adaptation. It was ugly, imperfect, but it was what the new world required. It required him to be closer, more direct, more ruthless in his focus. He could no longer afford the luxury of elegant solutions. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." We fixate on the ending, the bankruptcy, the divorce, the diagnosis. We see it as the final chapter. But it is always, without exception, the first page of a new one. The nature of that new chapter is up to you. Will you try to rewrite the old story on this new page, or will you dare to write something entirely new? Kalen approached the hollowed merchant. He did not come as a guard, a figure of authority. He came as something else. He knelt before her, the shard held loosely in his hand. He did not speak. He simply met her vacant gaze. He remembered Lyron's words again. Don't fight the shadow, feed the flame. He had always thought it was a metaphor for battle, for stoking one's own courage. He now saw a deeper meaning. He couldn't fight her emptiness. He couldn't argue it away or intimidate it into submission. That was the old way, the way of the unbroken sword. So he did something he had never done in his life as a warrior. He did not try to fix her. He simply saw her. He looked past the vacant eyes and remembered the woman who sold spices from 1,000 lands, whose laugh was as sharp and sweet as cinnamon. He remembered her fire, and in his own mind he focused on it. He fed it with his attention, with his memory, with his will. He did not know if it would work. He did not know what he was doing. He was acting on an instinct born of desperation and a flicker of new understanding. For a moment nothing happened. The woman remained a statue of sorrow. Then a flicker, a twitch in her fingers, a tear, slow and thick, traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It was the first sign of life he had seen in the city since its fall. It was not a victory. It was not a cure, but it was something. It was a spark. He realized then that the hallowed were not enemies to be slain. They were embers to be rekindled. His purpose was not to be a sword against the darkness, but a bellows for the light. This is the shift you must make. Your new reality, the one that came after the breaking, does not require your old aggression. It requires your new wisdom. It asks you not to fight your circumstances, but to understand them, to get close to them, to see the hidden opportunities within them. When you lose your job, the old weapon is to frantically apply for the same kind of position, to fight to reclaim what was lost. The new weapon, the shard, is to get close to the reality of your situation, to ask, what new skills can I learn? What different path could this force me to take? What fire within me has been neglected that I now have the time to feed? The shard is about precision. It's about finding the one small point where you can apply pressure and create a change. Kalen could not save the city, but he could kneel before one lost soul and offer a moment of focused, unwavering human connection. And in that moment he created a spark. He walked away from the woman, leaving her to her tear, a silent testament to a fire not yet extinguished. He felt a change in himself. The shard in his hand no longer felt like a broken piece of his past. It felt like the key to his future. It was a symbol of a new kind of strength. Not the strength to shatter obstacles, but the strength to find the cracks and let the light in. What is the shard that your breaking has left you with? What new, perhaps ugly and imperfect, tool do you now possess? Is it newfound humility? Is it a sudden abundance of time? Is it the painful clarity that comes from hitting rock bottom? Stop trying to use it like your old sword. Learn its new purpose. Get close to your problems. Find the one small place where you can apply your will, not with brute force, but with focused intent. That is how you begin to tend the embers. That is how you learn to fight the fire's fight. The single tear on the merchant's face was a seed. It didn't solve the problem of the city, but it changed the nature of the fight for Kalen. He was no longer a lone warrior against an overwhelming force. He was a fire tender in a garden of dying embers. His mission was no longer to defeat the darkness, but to cultivate the light. This required a radical shift in his strategy, a move from grand gestures to small, deliberate acts. He began to walk the city not as a patrol, but as a presence. He didn't seek out the hallowed to confront them. He sought out the small, forgotten pockets of life. He found a single, stubborn weed pushing its way through the cobblestones and cleared the debris around it, giving it access to the faint sunlight. He found a fountain, its waters choked with grime, and spent an entire day clearing it, until the water, though still murky, began to flow. He did these things with the shard of sulfur. He used it to cut away the thorns from a rose bush that had long since lost its flowers. He used its polished surface to reflect a beam of light into a darkened alleyway. He was repurposing the symbol of his failure, turning a weapon of war into a tool of cultivation. These acts were seemingly pointless. They did not feed the hungry or drive back the creeping despair in any measurable way. But they were not for the city. They were for him. He was teaching himself a new language of power. The power not of dominion, but of nurturance. The power not of breaking, but of building. This is the third truth you must internalize. True strength is not measured in a single act of Herculean effort, but in the relentless accumulation of small, disciplined choices. We are obsessed with the quantum leap, the overnight success, the one decisive battle that will win the war. We want the one perfect workout that will transform our bodies, the one brilliant idea that will make us millionaires, the one grand apology that will heal the broken relationship. But life is not a single battle. It is a long, grinding campaign. And victory is won not in the dramatic charges, but in the mundane, daily discipline of digging the trenches and cleaning your rifle. The Stoics called this prosach, the practice of paying attention. It is the art of focusing your will on the present moment, on the small task at hand, and executing it with excellence, regardless of how insignificant it may seem. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Assemble your life action by action, and be content if each one achieves its goal as far as possible, and no one can prevent this." He understood that the grand tapestry of a well-lived life is woven from a million tiny threads. You cannot control the design of the whole tapestry, but you can control the quality of each individual stitch. Kalen, by clearing the fountain, was practicing prosage. He could not control the despair that gripped the city. He could not control the actions of the hollowed, but he could control the movement of his hands as he lifted stone after grimy stone from the water. He could control the focus of his mind on that single, achievable task. And in that control, he found a new kind of power. A power that the breaking of his sword could not touch. One evening, as he worked to reset a loose stone in a crumbling wall, one of the hollowed approached. It was a young man, a former apprentice blacksmith, his hands, once strong and calloused, now soft and pale. He stopped and watched Kalen work. He didn't speak. He just watched. Kalen did not acknowledge him. He did not try to offer words of encouragement or wisdom. He simply continued his work. He focused on the stone, on the feel of the grit and mortar, on the precise angle needed to make it sit flush with the others. He poured all of his attention, all of his will, into this one simple action. He was demonstrating the principle, not explaining it. After an hour, the young man knelt down. He picked up a fallen stone, and he began to mimic Kalen, fitting it into the wall beside him. His movements were clumsy at first, his eyes still clouded with a distant haze, but he was acting. He was engaging with the physical world. He was making a choice. He was, in his own small way, adding a stitch to the tapestry. This is the application for you. Stop waiting for the grand inspiration to strike. Stop planning the perfect strategy to reclaim your old life. Pick up the nearest stone. Whatever your broken situation is, find the smallest, most manageable, most immediate action you can take and pour all of your attention into it. If your business has failed, don't try to write a new 50-page business plan. Organize the files on your computer. Make one phone call to a former colleague. Read one article about your industry. Take one small action and do it with complete focus. If your relationship is in ruins, don't try to have the one conversation that will fix everything. Wash the dishes. Make the bed. Do one small, tangible act of service, not for them, but for the principle of disciplined action itself. The goal is not the outcome. The goal is the practice. The goal is to retrain your will, to teach it to find power and purpose not in the distant, imagined future, but in the immediate, tangible present. Kalen and the apprentice worked through the night, stone by stone, in silence. They were not rebuilding the city. They were rebuilding themselves. They were learning that the foundation of an unbreakable spirit is not a grand idea, but the simple, repeated act of laying one stone perfectly upon another. The fire that never dies is not a raging inferno. It is a pilot light, and it is kept alive not by grand gestures but by the small, consistent, and disciplined addition of fuel. Find your stone. Lay it well. That is all that is asked of you, and it is everything. The arrival of the apprentice was a turning point. It was the first evidence that Kalen's new path was not a solitary one. The next day, 2 more of the hollowed appeared, drawn by the quiet, purposeful activity at the wall. They did not speak of the past. They did not speak of the despair. They simply joined the work. The wall grew, stone by steady stone, a testament to a silent, shared purpose. Kalen realized that he had stumbled upon a profound truth. Leadership in a time of crisis is not about rousing speeches or charismatic commands. It is about embodying the work. It is about being the first to pick up the stone and the last to set it down. It is about creating a center of gravity, a point of disciplined action around which others can orient themselves. The fire that never dies was not just within him. It was a potential within them all. His role was not to give them fire, but to create the conditions in which their own embers could reignite. This leads to the 4th great lesson, The lone wolf dies, the pack survives, but the pack is only as strong as the standard set by the alpha. In the world of self-improvement, we often fall into the trap of solitary struggle. We see it as our journey, our battle, our mountain to climb. We isolate ourselves, believing that we must find the strength within ourselves alone. This is a dangerous lie. We are social creatures. Our strength, our resilience, our very will to live is amplified and fortified by the tribe. But a tribe without a standard is just a mob. A group of broken people, left to their own devices, will often pull each other down, reinforcing their shared victimhood and despair. They become a circle of shivering souls, trying to draw warmth from a fire that has long gone out. The true leader, the true alpha, does not pander to this weakness. He does not offer hollow reassurances or join in the communal complaint. He turns his back on the shivering circle, walks to the woodpile, and begins with his own two hands to build a new fire. His actions are an indictment of their inaction. His discipline is a challenge to their despair. He doesn't ask them to join him. He makes the act of building the fire so compelling, so filled with purpose, that they cannot help but be drawn to it. The Roman general and statesman Cato the Younger was a master of this principle. In a time of rampant luxury and corruption, he did not merely preach a return to stoic virtues. He lived them. He walked barefoot through the city, wore the simple tunic of a common soldier, and ate the same coarse rations as his men. He did not command them to be disciplined. He showed them what discipline was. He became the living standard. And men, hardened soldiers and jaded senators alike, were shamed and inspired into following his example. They fought harder not because he ordered them to, but because they could not bear to be less than the man who led them. Calin, by working on the wall, was being Cato. He was setting the standard. He wasn't trying to fix the hollowed. He was focusing on his own task, embodying the virtue of purposeful action. The wall itself was meaningless. Its true purpose was to be a physical manifestation of a psychological principle. In the face of chaos, create order. In the face of despair, create purpose, even if it's just one stone at a time. As the days turned into weeks, the group at the wall grew. They were a strange crew, the silent and the broken, drawn together by the simple, rhythmic act of building. They began to share their meager rations. One of them, a former musician, started to hum as they worked, a low, monotonous tune that over time found a rhythm with the setting of the stones. It wasn't joy, it wasn't happiness, but it was harmony, it was order, it was life. This is the challenge for you. Look at your own life, at your tribe, your family, your friends, your colleagues. Are you contributing to a circle of shivering complainers, or are you building a new fire? When your friends start complaining about the economy, do you join in, or do you quietly talk about the new skill you're learning to adapt to it? When your family falls into patterns of blame and negativity, do you get drawn into the drama, or do you embody a quiet, unshakable calm and focus on solutions? You must become the standard. This is not about arrogance. It is about responsibility. You must hold yourself to a higher code of conduct, not so you can look down on others, but so you can give them a standard to look up to. You must be the one who gets up early, who eats the clean meal, who reads the book, who does the hard work in silence without seeking validation or applause. Your discipline is your sermon. Your actions are your creed. In the beginning, they may resent you for it. Your fire will expose how cold they have allowed themselves to become. But in time, the shivering will grow unbearable, and they will, one by one, leave the circle of complaint and be drawn to the warmth and light of your fire. Don't preach to them. Don't try to drag them with you. Simply build your wall. Be so relentlessly focused on your own purpose, on your own disciplined action, that your example becomes a force of nature. That is the essence of true leadership. That is how you turn a collection of broken individuals into an unbreakable tribe. And it starts with the lonely, thankless, and absolutely essential work of being the one who picks up the first stone. The wall was now taller than a man. It served no strategic purpose, enclosed nothing of value. It was a scar of discipline on a landscape of apathy, and it was working. More and more of the city's residents were drawn to it, not all to work, but to watch. They would stand for hours, observing the silent, rhythmic labor. The simple, undeniable fact of its creation was a challenge to the narrative of despair that had consumed them. The despair whispered, "Nothing can be done." The wall stood as a silent stone refutation. Something is being done. Kalen understood now that the fire was not just will, not just discipline, not just community. It was also hope, but not the soft, passive hope of wishing for a better future. It was the hard, active hope that is forged in the crucible of meaningful work. One day, a new figure appeared. Not one of the hallowed, but a man who still had a fire in his eyes, a fire of anger and resentment. It was Garrick, another former Sunstone guard, one who had been away when the city fell. He saw Kalen, his former brother-in-arms, dressed in rags, his hands raw, working like a common laborer with the broken shard of sulfur tucked into his belt. Garrick's sword, a fine, gleaming blade, was still at his side. "Look at you," Garrick spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "The last of the guard, playing with rocks while the darkness still holds our city. Have you gone mad? We should be fighting, not building this pointless monument to your own failure." This confrontation brings us to the fifth and most critical truth. The greatest enemy of your transformation is not your past weakness, but your past strength. It is the ghost of who you used to be, the echo of your old identity that will fight hardest to keep you from becoming who you need to be. Garrick represented Kalen's old self. The warrior who believed strength was in the sword, that purpose was in the fight, that victory was a matter of domination. He saw Kalen's new path as weakness, as a surrender. He was clinging to the old map in a world that had been redrawn. This is a battle you will all face. When you decide to change, to adopt a new philosophy, to become disciplined, the people who knew the old you will often be your greatest obstacle. They will tempt you with old habits, remind you of your past failures, and question your new resolve. "Why are you getting up so early? Why won't you have a drink with us? You've changed." They say it as an accusation. You must learn to hear it as a confirmation. Their resistance is a sign that your transformation is real. They are Garrick, holding up a gleaming, unbroken sword, trying to convince you that the broken shard in your hand is a sign of weakness, not a tool of a new and more profound strength. The Stoics had a term for this, apatheia. It is often mistranslated as apathy, but its true meaning is equanimity. It is the state of mind that is undisturbed by the passions, by the praise and criticism of others. It is the inner citadel, the fortress of the self that is impregnable to the opinions and judgments of the outside world. Kalen looked at Garrick, at his polished armor and his perfect sword. He felt a pang of his old self, a flicker of shame. But then he looked at his hands, at the calluses forming over the raw wounds. He looked at the wall, at the community of silent workers. He was no longer the man who wielded soulfire. He had become something else. "The fight is not out there, Garrick," Kalen said, his voice calm, steady. "It never was. The enemy is not a force to be met with steel. It is a void to be filled with purpose. Your sword is useless against it." Useless. Garrick drew his blade, its edge singing in the gray air. "This is the symbol of our order. It is our strength." "No," Kalen replied, his gaze unwavering. "It was the symbol of our pride, and our pride was the crack in our foundation that let the despair in. We thought we were the sword. We forgot we were meant to be the fire." This is the moment of truth in your own journey. You must be willing to divorce yourself from the validation of your past. Your past successes, your old titles, your former glories, they are all Garrick's sword. They are beautiful, they are powerful, but they belong to a different war. To cling to them is to refuse to adapt to the new reality. You must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be willing to have your new purpose seen as madness by those who are still living in the old world. You must find your worth not in their applause, but in the quiet, steady work of laying your own stones. Kalen turned his back on Garrick and his gleaming sword. He picked up another stone. His action was a louder statement than any words. It said, "I am no longer who you think I am. Your judgment has no power here. My focus is on the work." Garrick stood there, his sword held aloft, his righteous anger suddenly finding no purchase. He looked foolish, a man dressed for a war that was no longer being fought. He saw the intent focus in Kaelin's eyes, the quiet dignity of the other workers. He saw the wall, a thing of undeniable substance and purpose. And for the first time, a flicker of doubt entered his eyes. Your task is not to argue with the Garricks in your life. It is not to justify your new path or seek their approval. Your task is to make your new life, your new discipline, your new purpose, so undeniably real and so profoundly effective that their criticisms become irrelevant. Let them cling to their polished swords of past glory. You have a wall to build. Your results will be your only argument. Let the strength of your new foundation be the only answer they ever need. The fire that never dies does not need to announce itself. It simply burns, and its light over time will either attract them or repel them. Either way, you will be free. Garrick did not leave. He sheathed his sword, but the anger on his face was replaced by a simmering confusion. He watched for days, a silent, judgmental sentinel as the wall grew. He saw the subtle changes in the workers. The vacant eyes of the hollowed were beginning to show flickers of focus. Their movements, once listless, now had a rhythm, a purpose. The community, though still mostly silent, had developed an unspoken language of cooperation. A man would need a larger stone, and another would appear at his side to help him lift it. A tool would be dropped, and a hand would be there to return it. They were a body, slowly, clumsily learning to work as one. Kaelin knew Garrick's presence was a test, not just for him, but for the fragile community they were building. Garrick's judgment, his adherence to the old ways, was a poison that could seep into the cracks of their nascent resolve. One evening, as the light failed, Kaelin approached him. He held out not a stone, but a piece of hard, dry bread, his own ration for the meal. "You are watching us starve," Kaelin said, his voice devoid of accusation. "But your anger is a heavier burden than your hunger." This brings us to the sixth lesson, a lesson that is perhaps the most difficult to learn. You must learn to love your enemy, not because they deserve it, but because your hatred of them is a cage for you. The enemy is not just the external critic, like Garrick. It is the internal one. It is the voice of your own doubt, your own past failures, your own lingering shame. It is the part of you that, like Garrick, clings to the old identity and judges your new efforts as foolish and weak. To hate Garrick would be to give him power. It would be to engage him on his own terms, to step back into the world of conflict and ego that Kaelin was trying to leave behind. It would be an admission that Garrick's judgment still mattered. The Stoic path is not one of aggression, but of absorption. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." This is a profound psychological insight. Revenge, anger, resentment, these emotions chain you to the person who wronged you. You are forced to carry their memory, their injury with you everywhere you go. You give them free rent in your head. To be unlike them is to achieve freedom. It is to refuse to let their poison enter your system. By offering Garrick his bread, Kaelin was not being submissive. He was being strategic. He was refusing to play Garrick's game of anger and contempt. He was changing the battlefield from one of ego to one of common humanity. He was saying, "I see your anger, but I will not mirror it. I will meet it with something else." Garrick looked at the bread, then at Kaelin's face. He saw no fear, no pleading. He saw only a calm, centered strength that his anger could not touch. He was a wave crashing against a cliff. All his sound and fury resulted only in his own dissipation. "I don't need your pity," Garrick snarled, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It is not pity," Kaelin said. "It is a choice. We can be two warriors fighting over the ashes, or we can be two builders laying a new foundation. The past is dead, Garrick. All that matters is the next stone. This is the practice you must adopt in your own life. Think of the person who has wronged you, the boss who fired you, the partner who betrayed you, the friend who let you down. Your resentment toward them is the unbroken sword you are still carrying. You think it is your weapon, but it is your burden. Its weight is exhausting you, poisoning your present and clouding your future. To offer them bread does not mean you must literally forgive them or let them back into your life. It is an internal act. It is the act of choosing to meet their memory not with anger, but with indifference, with a focus on your own path. It is the conscious decision to stop letting their story be your story. Every time you feel that surge of resentment, you must consciously replace it with a focus on your wall, on your work, on your discipline, on the next stone. You must starve the anger of your attention. You must let it wither and die from neglect. Over time, its power over you will fade. You will become unlike the one who injured you. You will be free. Garrick did not take the bread. But the next morning, Kalen saw that he had moved from the edge of the work site to a position closer to the wall. He was still watching, but his posture had changed. The rigid judgment was gone, replaced by a quiet, reluctant curiosity. He was a fortress whose gates were beginning to creak open. Kalen had not defeated him with a sword. He had begun to conquer him with a principle. Do not fight your demons, internal or external. Do not give them the battle they crave. Simply turn your attention to the next stone, the next disciplined act. Build a purpose so strong, a focus so absolute, that the voices of anger and doubt, both from within and without, fade into irrelevance. The fire that never dies does not waste its energy fighting the darkness. It simply burns brighter. The change in Garrick was slow, almost imperceptible. He began to clear rubble from the path of the workers. He would fetch tools that had been left behind. He did these things gruffly, without a word, as if annoyed at himself for doing them. But he was participating. The wall had become a silent teacher, its logic irrefutable. One could argue with Kalen's philosophy, but one could not argue with a wall that was a foot taller every day. The evidence of progress was right there, solid and real. The community of workers was solidifying. The shared purpose had forged a bond stronger than any oath. They were no longer the hollowed, they were the builders. They had found a new identity, not in a glorious past, but in the humble, demanding present. Kalen knew they were ready for the next stage. His own transformation was a mirror for theirs. He had moved from mourning a broken past, to adapting to the present, to disciplined action, to building a community, to neutralizing old enemies. Now he had to face the future. Not just the future of the next stone or the next day, but the larger question: what was this all for? What was the purpose of the wall, and what lay beyond it? This leads to the seventh truth. A fire needs oxygen to grow. A purpose to be sustained needs a vision. Discipline and daily action are the fuel, but without a vision of a worthy future, the fire will eventually consume its fuel and burn out. It is not enough to simply lay stones. You must be laying them in the service of building a cathedral. The work on the wall had been a necessary first step. It was a form of therapy, a way to retrain the will and rebuild the spirit. But it was not an end in itself. To continue to build it indefinitely would be to trade one form of mindlessness for another. The true purpose of discipline is not to become a perfect machine of action, but to build a will strong enough to pursue a worthy goal. The Stoics were not passive ascetics. They were senators, generals, emperors, playwrights. They practiced their philosophy not by retreating from the world, but by engaging with it more effectively. Their inner discipline was the launchpad for their outer ambition. Their inner citadel was the fortress from which they waged their campaigns in the world. Kalen gathered the builders, including Garrick, who stood at the edge of the group, still separate but listening. "We have learned to work again," Kalen began, his voice carrying over the quiet assembly. "We have learned to find strength in the stone and purpose in our hands. We have remembered what it means to be men and women who act, not who are acted upon. But this wall is not our home. It is our school. The lesson is over. Now we must decide what we will build." He pointed beyond the wall toward the heart of the city, where the great library, a repository of all their people's knowledge and art, had been abandoned, left to the dust and the despair. "We have been focused on survival," he said. "It is time to focus on revival. We will not rebuild the city as it was. That city was a monument to a strength that could be broken. We will build something new. A city that finds its strength not in its swords or its walls of stone, but in the fire of knowledge, of art, of community. A city whose foundations are in the hearts of its people. Our first task is not to build another wall, but to save the books, to relight the lamps of the library." A murmur went through the crowd. The library was in the deepest, most blighted part of the city. To go there was to walk into the heart of the despair they had all fought so hard to escape. Garrick stepped forward. "That is a fool's errand," he said, his voice regaining some of its old authority. "It is not defensible. We have no weapons. We have no soldiers." "You are still thinking in the old way," Kalen replied, his gaze meeting Garrick's. "Our weapon is not the sword. It is the will we have forged right here at this wall. Our defense is not a shield of steel, but a purpose so bright that the darkness cannot extinguish it. We do not go to fight the hallowed who remain. We go to offer them a new choice. The choice of the stone or the choice of the book. The choice of mindless labor or the choice of mindful learning. This is the leap you must eventually make. Your personal discipline, your morning routines, your workout regimen, your diet, these are your wall. They are essential for forging the will, but they are not the point. The point is what you do with that forged will. You must attach it to a vision that is bigger than yourself. A vision that serves not just your own survival, but the revival of something noble and worthy. Perhaps your library is starting a business that solves a real problem. Perhaps it is dedicating your newfound energy and focus to your family. Perhaps it is creating art that inspires or volunteering in your community. You must find your library. You must find the worthy future that will give your daily discipline its ultimate meaning. Without it, your self-improvement is just a form of sophisticated narcissism. It is a wall that encloses nothing. Kalen looked at the faces of the builders. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw a new light in their eyes. They were no longer the hallowed. They were architects of a new world. They had built a wall. Now they were ready to build a future. "The choice is yours," Kalen said to them all, though his eyes were still on Garrick. "You can stay here and continue to lay stones, or you can come with me and help me save the soul of our city." He turned and began to walk toward the city's heart. He did not look back to see who would follow. He had learned the lesson of leadership. You do not persuade with words. You lead with your movement toward a worthy future. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then the crunch of a single footstep on the gravel behind him. Then another, and another. Soon, the sound of a small, determined army was at his back. At the very rear of the group, his hand resting on the pommel of his now useless sword, was Garrick. The fire that never dies is not meant to be contained. It is meant to spread. Once you have built your own inner fire through discipline, you have a responsibility to carry it as a torch into the darkest corners of the world. Find your library. And then have the courage to start walking toward it. The journey to the library was a descent into the underworld. The despair in this part of the city was a palpable entity, a physical cold that seeped through their clothes. The silence was absolute, broken only by the shuffling of their own feet. They passed more of the hallowed, sitting in doorways, staring at walls, lost in their own private oblivion. The builders, to their credit, did not falter. The discipline of the wall had given them a new kind of armor. Their eyes were fixed forward, their steps steady. They were a moving island of purpose in a sea of apathy. They were led by Kalen, the broken shard of soulfire in his hand, not as a weapon but as a reminder. A reminder that their greatest strength was born from their greatest failure. This journey brings us to the final and perhaps most liberating truth. You are not defined by the weight of your past, but by the direction of your next step. We carry our histories like a sack of stones on our backs. Our failures, our traumas, our regrets. We believe this sack is who we are. We believe its weight is our destiny, but the past is a story, and you are the storyteller. You can choose to tell a story of victimhood and loss, or you can choose to tell a story of resilience and growth. The story is not in the events themselves, but in the meaning you assign to them. Kalen could have been defined by the breaking of Soulfare. He could have told himself a story of failure, of being the last, unworthy guard. That story would have led him to become one of the hollowed, another stone statue in a dying city. But he chose to tell a different story. He chose to see the breaking of the sword not as an end, but as a beginning. He chose to see the shard not as a symbol of loss, but as a tool for a new kind of building. He changed the story, and in doing so, he changed his destiny. The Stoics understood this profoundly. They called it the art of acquiescence. This doesn't mean passive resignation. It means accepting the events you cannot change, the past, and then focusing all your energy on what you can change, your interpretation of those events and your actions in the present. Epictetus put it simply, it is our attitude toward events, not the events themselves, which we can control. Nothing is by its own nature calamitous. Even death is terrible only if we fear it. They reached the great doors of the library. They were shut, covered in dust and cobwebs. It felt as though no one had entered them in a century. Within these walls lay the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors, the stories, the science, the philosophy. It was the city's mind, its soul, and it was sleeping. The group paused. This was the final threshold. To open these doors was to fully commit to the new vision, to turn their backs completely on the old world of warriors and swords. It was Kalen who stepped forward. He did not try to force the doors. He simply stood before them and did something unexpected. He began to speak. He spoke of the wall, of the feel of the stone, of the quiet dignity of shared labor. He spoke of the choice between being a victim of circumstance and an agent of purpose. He was not speaking to the doors. He was speaking to the hallowed who had gathered in the plaza behind them, drawn by this strange procession. He was telling them a story where the broken could become builders. A story where the end of one world was the beginning of a better one. And as he spoke, Garrick, the old warrior, stepped up beside him. He did not speak. He drew his gleaming sword. The crowd flinched, but he did not raise it in a posture of attack. He reversed it, holding it by the blade, and offered the hilt to Kalen. A builder needs better tools than a shard, Garrick said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. It was a surrender of the old way, a surrender of his pride. It was an acceptance of the new story. Kalen looked at the sword, the symbol of everything he had lost and everything he had moved beyond. He smiled, a true, warm smile that reached his eyes. "We have better tools than this now, my friend," he said, and he reached out and placed his hand on Garrick's shoulder. "We have this." He gestured to the community of builders, "and we have this." He gestured to the great doors of the library, a shared purpose and a worthy future. He turned back to the doors. He put his hand on the cold, dusty wood, and he pushed. The doors were heavy, groaning in protest. For a moment they held fast. Then Garrick put his shoulder next to Kalen's, then another of the builders, then another. And with a great collective effort, the doors to the library swung open, releasing a breath of stale, forgotten air and flooding the darkness within with the first new light it had seen in an age. The fire that never dies is not a magical flame. It is a choice. It is the choice to tell a better story. It is the choice to see every ending as a new beginning. It is the choice to pick up your broken pieces and build something new, not in spite of your failure, but because of it. Your sword is broken. Your city is in ruins. Your past is a weight that threatens to crush you. But the doors to your library are right in front of you. Within them is all the wisdom, all the strength, all the purpose you will ever need. The story is not over. It is waiting for you to turn the page. The only question is, will you have the courage to push open the doors? The choice, as always, is yours. Look around you, not with your eyes but with your mind. You are standing in the ruins of your own making. The broken promises, the abandoned projects, the relationships turned to dust. You are surrounded by the ghosts of who you thought you should be. and you are holding the shattered hilt of a weapon you once trusted. This is not a tragedy. This is your coronation. This is the moment you are stripped of the non-essential. The moment you are freed from the tyranny of your own expectations. The man you were had to die so the man you are meant to be can be born. The fire you feel now, that faint, flickering ember of hope mixed with the terror of the unknown, that is the never die. That is the only thing that was ever truly yours. Everything else was borrowed. The lessons of Kalen are not a fable. They are a roadmap, a guide out of the ruins and into the rebuilding. 1. Stop mourning the broken sword. Your past failures are not your identity. They were a test. A test you were meant to fail so you could learn that your strength is not in the steel you carry, but in the will that allows you to get back up. 2. Adapt to the new weapon. The ugly, imperfect tools your failure has given you, humility, desperation, clarity, are more powerful than any weapon you wielded in your comfort. Learn their new use. Get close to the problem. Be precise. Be relentless. 3. Lay one stone at a time. Forget the grand victory. Forget the final outcome. Focus with absolute monk-like devotion on the single, disciplined action in front of you. In the mastery of the mundane, you will build the foundation of the magnificent. 4. Build a new fire. Don't just join the shivering. Become the standard. Your discipline, your focus, your unwavering commitment to the work will be the gravitational center that pulls others out of their own despair. Lead not with words, but with work. 5. Let the old you die. The ghost of your past strength will be your greatest enemy. Be willing to be misunderstood. Let them call you mad. Your results will be the only argument you need. Your peace will be the only victory that matters. 6. Starve your anger, feed your purpose. The resentment you hold is a cage you are building for yourself. The best revenge is to become so consumed by your new mission that you forget the injury. Be unlike those who wronged you. Be free. 7. Find your library. Your discipline must be in the service of a vision that is greater than your own survival. A wall is a school, not a home. Find the worthy future that gives meaning to your daily struggle. And finally, tell a better story. You are the author of your own epic. The past is just a chapter. You have the power in this very moment to decide that the breaking of your sword was the best thing that ever happened to you. To decide that this is not the story of your defeat, but the story of your becoming. This is your moment. The doors are in front of you. The community of builders is waiting. The fire within you, the fire that never dies, is urging you to take that next step. So take it, push. I want you to share this story, not for me, but for the other builders out there, the ones still sitting in the ruins, still clinging to their broken swords. Let them know they are not alone. In the comments below, I want you to write one sentence, one declaration. I am a builder. No explanation. No justification, just that. A simple statement of a new identity. A new story. Let's see how big our crew of builders really is. And if you are ready to continue this journey, to go deeper into the art of forging an unbreakable will, then subscribe. Because our work here, the work of rebuilding, has only just begun. Now, go lay your stone.